Hi, it's Tuesday, September 16th, and we have several systems to watch in the tropics over the next several days. Now, even more so than yesterday, it appears that we are now getting into the long anticipated peak of the Northern Hemisphere cyclone season. The primary focuses of today's video are going to be 92L in the Atlantic and then 23, Tropical Storm 23 by Luzon in the Philippines, and then Invest 90W behind that in the Western Pacific, though I will briefly touch on the Eastern Pacific as there's a couple systems active there before we get into all of the more in-depth stuff. First, we've got Tropical Storm Mario just west of the Baja California Peninsula. This system is moving over cooler waters today and is not expected to be any land threat. There may be some remnant moisture that pushes into portions of northwest Mexico or the southwest US, but apart from that, nothing else to talk about with Mario there. We also got a disturbance behind Mario, dubbed Invest 96E south of Mexico. This system is likely to form as it tracks towards the northwest and is forecast to stay offshore. The forecast has really not changed further northwest for Baja California. Most models keep this out to sea, and we really don't have to, for now, worry about any impacts from that system. Okay, starting off in the Atlantic with our more in-depth stuff, we're going to go into detail on Invest 92 well today, as the system has been making some good progress today, and we've had some changes in the forecast going forward for the environment as it tracks further northwest. But first things first, looking at how the storm is doing today, we still see that the system is doing rather well for what's been tracking through, which has been a pretty dry tropical Atlantic. You can see that we have a lot of convection blossoming still over a much more coherent area of low pressure than we had yesterday. When I made my video yesterday, that we had a area of low pressure present, but it was still rather broad and it was very weak overall. Now the low is still rather broad, but we can see that there's much more spin evident at the surface, indicating that this convection has helped to tighten this area of low pressure some over the past day. And this is now getting rather close to becoming a tropical cyclone. Really, what we need to see from the system now is organized and sustaining convection to take place over this center of circulation. Beyond that point, the system will be able to be classified as a tropical cyclone. Now, going forward, the system is going to begin to feel some obstacles over the next day or so as it tracks further northwest, as wind shear is forecast to increase starting later this week. This is the water vapor imagery showing the environment over the system right now, and overall things are still rather favorable. You can see we have this clockwise turning in general in the environment aloft, showing that we have an area of high pressure draped directly on top of Invest 92L today. But if we look further towards the north, then we can go to the bigger view to see this. Here's Invest 92, and here's this counterclockwise rotation just north of it. This is an upper low that is cutting off and now beginning to back towards the southwest, north of Invest 92L. Now, like we talked about yesterday, this upper low is likely going to be too far to impart much meaningful shear onto Invest 92L. But what it's going to do is going to cause a little bit of displacement with this upper ridge sitting on top of 92L today. And so eventually what we're going to see is the surface low is going to push towards the northwest, but the ridge is not going to push as far west as the surface low does. So we're going to end up with the system center beneath an area like this relative to the upper high pressure. And so what you can see with the cloud movement with this is that you net some southerly flow aloft, and that's going to cause some vertical shear for the system going forward. You can see this happen on the GFS. This is the upper low wind plot showing you what's active right now. And you can see here's Invest 92, and here's that clockwise turning aloft, showing that area of high pressure. Here's that upper low as well. And you can see that upper low cuts off. And as we go into Wednesday and into Thursday, the surface low tracks northwest, but you see we're now getting a little bit of displacement between 92L and the upper high. And so by this point, we begin to get some of that southerly shear being directly imparted upon the vortex of 92L. And so this causes some disruption from the moderate shear the system is now dealing with. Now, the other big issue is that there's a lot of dry air to the system's northwest. If you take a look again at this water vapor imagery, one thing we talked about yesterday was that behind these upper troughs, when they dig in, they often deposit a lot of dry air on the backside. And what we're seeing today is this dry air start to encroach upon 92L. So if we go to this closer visible loop, it might be hard to see, but if you look beneath the cirrus clouds here, we're seeing some darker tones of gray begin to get closer to the center of 92L. And so as this shear begins to strengthen over the next day or so, this is also going to lead to a more effective intrusion of this dry air into the center. So if we look at this moisture plot from the GFS out to hour 48, you can see that with that shear out of the south or southwest, pushing all the storms off to the northern and eastern sides, we've also got all this dry air being wrapped around onto the southern side. And this looks like a very disorganized tropical system, sort of more subtropical like, although this would still be a fully tropical system. But the characteristic of this kind of cloud shape does look more subtropical. And what this really tells you is that 92L is likely to get rather disorganized in this time frame going into later this week because of the combination of the shear and the dry air. Now, beyond this point, this upper low is weakening quite quickly, and you'll see it decay away on the model. And by this point, we reach uncertainty number 2, and that's actually with upper low number 2. Haven't really had to talk about this upper low yet, but if we look at this big view again, you'll see southerly flow here just southeast of Bermuda, which is here, and then we have some southwesterly flow here with all this convection northeast of the Caribbean. This is outlining the southern edge of an upper trough in here like this, and this is also an upper low which is going to be cutting off and backing towards the southwest, towards the Turks and Caicos, and towards the Bahamas. But models today are in disagreement on exactly how the evolution of this upper low is going to go over the next couple of days. On the GFS scenario, this upper low decays rather fast. And so when 92L is in a better environment where the first upper low has decayed, it's able to re-moisten the environment surrounding its immediate center, and we start to see a nice upper level high pressure system form on top. This is in direct response to convection forming on top of it. You can see it happen here on the model. The greens become more centered over the low rather than separated away from it. But the European model and some other global models with the European are a little bit different. They show this upper low, which is right here now, maintaining itself a little bit more. And you see that when we get further northwest, by this point, 92L is trying to recuperate itself after this initial burst of shear and dry air. But what we see is a similar scenario take place on the model when it's further northwest, where this upper low causes a little bit of displacement between this upper ridge and 92L, and that causes a fairly significant shear. This system is tracking northwest at this time, and all this blue coloring shows you pretty strong southerly flow aloft. And in some points of this model forecast, the European has 30 knots of shear or greater. And if that were to come true, 92L would struggle quite a bit in this part of the Atlantic. Now, beyond that point, will that stop, the system from intensifying at any point in its lifetime? It's a bit uncertain to say because that all depends on what kind of interaction 92L may have with this upper low, and also depends on exactly how this upper low evolves with time. It will likely be weakening regardless of what happens here with time. But if it's stronger here, we may see more of an interaction occur between 92L and the upper low. And in this particular instance, the upper low and 92L interact favorably for the storm, and we end up with a stronger hurricane. But there can be scenarios here where this upper low begins to shear it and it weakens considerably, but also these upper lows, like with the first one that I mentioned at the beginning, tend to have a lot of dry air with them. And whenever this upper low decays like this in a scenario, we've seen this in the Western Pacific a lot this typhoon season, that can leave a lot of dry air that can cause issues later down the line and cause the system to struggle to intensify. So the key message with 92L is there's a lot of uncertainty still to go through over the next week. And there's going to be forecast stuff that we're talking about even beyond this point, because it's not done by, next Monday or Tuesday. Beyond that point, we also have the forecast further north. And we could certainly be seeing impacts sometime next week to Bermuda. So especially in Bermuda, you need to be watching this very closely. Now, for areas further west, for now, it doesn't seem like a all too significant risk. I guess there is a possibility that if it does stay weak, say a scenario where this upper low does weaken it and keep it weak for quite a while, it could sneak further west and stay further south, and maybe we see some form of impacts to the Turks and Caicos. But that's a very specific setup, and I would not say that's overly likely right now. And for anyone worried about it on the US East Coast, further west, the general pattern does support the system recurving out to sea. It's very unlikely at this point that it will make it far west enough to be any kind of a significant risk to the US. The most significant land risk going forward does appear to be Bermuda, which is why you all there need to be paying close attention to the system. And I'll, of course, have more videos on the system as it does evolve over the coming week. Now, finally, this is the outlook from the Hurricane Center. You can see 92 out here. Very high chance of developing in the next 2 days from the trends we're seeing today, 90% to be specific. And you can see that track generally going northwest there. And we'll talk about all the things that the system may have to deal with evolving in time. We'll see exactly how things turn out with the system. But again, in Bermuda, make sure you're paying close attention to the system over the next week. There's also another tropical wave that the NHC has marked off the west coast of Africa. This system has a low chance of developing, and we're really not going to talk about this system for some time, maybe even ever, because the system may never really be a threat to land, but we'll watch it as you typically do with tropical waves in peak season. The most impacts in short term that we can expect is some showers and storms and maybe some gusty winds in Western Africa in the Cabo Verde Islands. But that's not too much different from any other normal tropical wave that comes through. And apart from this, these are only 2 areas of interest in the Atlantic for now. So now we can move to the Western Pacific. As I mentioned, we're getting into a more active period in the global tropics, and the Western Pacific has really shown signs of waking up over the past couple of days. Starting off with Tropical Storm 23 off the northern coast of the Philippines, you can see this system looks pretty good off the coast overnight tonight. And I didn't pull it up, but we have some radar imagery out of the Philippines, and then the system is trying to build an eye on eye wall structure. Now, the good news is that the system is about to interact pretty strongly with the landmass, so whatever progress it's made will likely be reverted over the next several hours going into our Wednesday. But the system will be coming offshore of the northern Philippines in a couple days, and it will be traversing the South China Sea, and we could be seeing some intensification from there on out as it approaches the southern coast of China. Now, immediately for the Philippines, because of that tight inner core that we are seeing on radar develop, we could see an increased risk of some tropical storm force winds along the east central coast. It does seem to be being underdone intensity-wise by a lot of the official agencies. The Japan Meteorological Agency and Pegasus still only have this as a tropical depression. Apologies for those flashing frames, by the way. But I would say that this is probably a tropical storm by this point, and we may see an increased risk of power outages as well as the system comes ashore overnight and into this morning. Okay, going into the future forecast of the system. This is the water imagery over the system right now. You can see here it is centered just east of the Philippines, and we have might be hard to tell, but we have a little bit of an upper trough sitting just south of Taiwan. You can tell it because we have some of this northwesterly flow rather, coming into the Luzon Straits, and it turns more towards out of the southwest east of Taiwan. That's denoting the southern edge of this upper level trough. And for the short-term future, it's possible that we see some vertical shear imparted upon 23 from all this northwesterly flow on the backside of this trough. And that could impact the system a little bit more because we are getting land interaction with the system right now. But as we go in time, this upper trough is rather weak. It's also very small, and this is not forecast to cause a lot of shear over the next several days, and we'll likely see the system in a fairly favorable environment for intensification as it approaches southern China as we go throughout the rest of this week. This is the upper little wind plot showing you out to this morning. This is where the system is centered by this point over northeastern Luzon, and you can see the little counterclockwise rotation here. This is that small upper trough sitting just southeast, or southwest rather, of Taiwan. And you can see this little streak of blue. That's that little bit of northwesterly flow that might impart some vertical shear in, say, the next day. But beyond that point, you'll see that the system becomes better aligned with this little weak upper trough. And what I mean by that is it's on the eastern side. And so the system is tracking northwest here. And you'll see that all the blue and the streamlines are pointing the similar direction. So the flow aloft is aligned, so that means a decrease in vertical shear. And alongside this, as it comes further northwest, this upper trough decays and we begin to see more clockwise rotation surrounding the system, showing an area of high pressure aloft, keeping that low vertical shear in place. Now, there is quite a bit of uncertainty going forward with this system. This environment is rather favorable for some intensification to occur, though something we need to realize is the system will likely need some time to recover after it comes off of Luzon. Typically, that takes about a day, so we may have about a day left over water if the system does not come ashore into southern China. And I say that because there is some model disagreement on exactly if we're going to make landfall in China or not. On the GFS scenario, we actually see the system get very close to the south coast, and then it just begins to brush the coast as we have strong area of high pressure building here over central China, which keeps the system offshore. And this causes a wide variance in intensity probabilities from different model guidance because in the GFS scenario, if we do remain offshore enough, the environment, like I mentioned, is favorable for some intensification to occur. And so it's possible that if it does stay offshore and far off enough, it could intensify as it begins to back west or even southwest. And we see the pressure lower a little bit on the model, showing that potential. But other models like the European have the system coming offshore. And in that scenario, the system is not able to strengthen because it's not over open water. And so you just end up with a weak tropical storm coming in, not really intensifying all too much beyond that. And this is really just going to be a watch and wait type thing, as it's a very subtle difference between, having a system that's over land, not able to intensify, compared to having a system over water, able to intensify. This is not a big difference to make in this kind of a time frame, which would be at this point 4 to 5 days out. So this is certainly something to watch in southern China going forward, because we could be seeing the system, if it stays offshore enough, intensify to a point where we may get some strong gusty winds along the south coast of China, alongside some potential storm surge and heavy rainfall. Now, this is the current forecast from Pagasa. They're staying on the lower end of this. Now, this may be able to be bumped up a little bit because, like I mentioned, a lot of agencies have this as a tropical depression right now. In all likelihood, this is probably a tropical storm by now. As you can see, that general expectation of it moving over the landmass, getting a little bit disrupted, and then we maybe see the system intensify a little bit as it approaches the coast, and then we see it sort of just stall out and then meander around the coast. But you can see there's a wide range of potential tracks that the system could take. It could go over land, it could stay further offshore. If it's further offshore, that leads to a higher potential intensity that the system could attain. Now, this is not going to be the only system we have to worry about in southern China over the next week. Key and I may have also noticed this other system here in the Philippine Sea. This is Invest 90W in the tropical Pacific, just west of Guam right now. And over the next few days, this is going to be gradually tracking west-northwest through the tropical Pacific, generally towards the northern Philippines and Taiwan. And the environment is also, for this system, forecast to be favorable. But the unfortunate thing with this system is it will likely not have the land interaction to stop it from from intensifying potentially significantly. And we're now seeing models today especially uptick on the potential intensification that we could see out of 90W going forward. Now, if we look at this water vapor imagery again, this is over 23, but I want to highlight this upper low that you can see here just east of Taiwan. And I'll pause this here so we're not looking at a bunch of flashing frames. Now, you would think that this upper low initially would be going to back southwest or towards the west, towards China and Taiwan, as a lot of upper lows here do. But we have, like I mentioned with the system 23, as it gets towards the coast, there's an area of high pressure building over central China, and that's going to keep this system from just backing west into the continent. So what's going to happen is this upper low is instead going to begin to dive towards the south, towards Invest 90W. Now, initially, this may cause some shear for our system. And I'll play this out on the GFS model so you can see. Here's that upper low by this point, and you'll see it begins to dive south directly towards Invest 90W. And so initially, you see we have some of this southerly flow on the eastern part of this low. that may impart some southerly shear to start. However, this upper low is tracking south pretty fast and it's decaying as well rather quickly as it backs towards the southwest. And so what we see is that on the model, it's very similar in a way to 23 further west. It gets into a favorable orientation relative to this upper low to where it's now on the northeastern side of this. So the flow around the upper low is now aligned well with the direction the storm is going. And with that upper low continuing to decay, we then see upper level high pressure begin to build directly on top of Invest 90W, which would be a typhoon on the model by this point. And this is a low shear environment over very warm waters that honestly has not really been tapped into at all this typhoon season. We've had several systems this typhoon season, but none really have been long tracked and going over areas of water like this. We've really just had very short lived systems very near coast of land. And so this leaves a lot of fuel available for 90W going forward. And with this kind of a primed environment, it's absolutely possible that we see something like the GFS scenario take shape here. Now, I always say the GFS does tend to go aggressive on these things, and that is true. It is more so our most aggressive model, generally speaking, with global models. However, the European model has also come into this idea. You can see it happen very similarly on the upper low wind plot with this upper low that backs towards the south, and we see it interact favorably with Invest 90W. And by that point, we have upper level high pressure system once it's decayed away, draped on top of it, and we see intensification occur into a typhoon as it comes towards Taiwan, the northern Philippines, and southern China. And so what this tells us is that when you have the GFS and European agreeing on something, and not only this, we also have a lot of other model agreement on this, that something is certainly possible to happen here. And this is certainly something to pay attention to closely if you're in Taiwan, the northern Philippines, and southern China, as the environment here does look rather ideal for what could be a typhoon coming through this area as we head into next week. Now, of course, there are some things we need to still iron out. As of right now, the disturbance is still weak, and the interaction between it and this upper low can change over time. I mean, this is still a forecast into 3-4 days out, so things can still change. But models are now coming into agreement today, and that's the key message here, that we could be looking at a typhoon coming west into the general vicinity of Taiwan, the northern Philippines, and southern China, and it may be of significant strength as it comes further west. As like I mentioned, the waters here have been virtually untapped so far this typhoon season. And I will leave links to local weather offices that I can find for all these areas at the top of the description so you can stay updated with all the information on the system as it does develop. And I'll have more videos on the system as we do go in time. That's all that I've got for today on all of these systems. I'll continue to have more videos on all of these systems going forward as we head into the much anticipated peak of the Northern Hemisphere cyclone season. That's all that I've got for today. Thanks for watching.